Coronavirus experts are now saying that breathing and talking can produce 100 to 1,000 times more aerosols than droplets. And you might not have heard, aerosols remain suspended in the air for hours and can move many meters from the original source, especially indoors. These scientists say a 6-foot separation may not be enough. And as our islands open up to trans-Pacific travel, we look forward to something called the Aloha Protocol. This company is working on rolling it out ASAP. And as we continue to wear our masks, learn about why smiling even behind your mask is good for you. And hear the song by the local musician, Tori Nunn.
I know that the times are hard.
Aloha Mamas, and welcome to the CoronaMama Zoom Room. This show is brought to you by the Maui Mama magazine. And we are here for you, the Maui Mama, to help you to connect and express and share all those things that are on our minds during this pandemic time. Our motto is #share aloha, not corona. I'm Angeline Chu Longshore, and today is a very timely show. Our islands are about to open up to trans-Pacific travel, and I know that's weighing on a lot of our minds, a lot of feelings, mixed emotions about that. So as Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson says,
we got to control the controllables. We got to control the controllables.
#control the controllables.
We got to control the controllables.
So today we're talking to a National Geographic science writer who explains how the virus is spread through aerosol transmission, and she breaks it down so we can understand what conditions makes us more or less likely to get sick through the virus being airborne. And because then you'll understand how important mask wearing is. At the end of the show, we'll talk about why smiling for you behind your mask is not only nice for others, but it's actually healthy for you. And then we'll show the smiling eyes behind the masks and hear the song "Let Your Eyes Smile" that this local musician performed for us in a previous episode. And hey, if you want to donate to the CoronaMama show, you can text to donate. That number is 808-215-4858. 215-4858, or click on the donation link on the Maui Mama Magazine Facebook page show notes below this video. And now for our Actions of Aloha segment. This is really timely too. We mentioned in a previous episode this Oahu-based company called Oceanit. Well, we can thank them profusely because they are going to make our daily lives easier with what they're calling the Aloha Protocol. The Aloha Protocol testing regime was originally designed for the traveler in mind with this tourist-based economy, but it can be used for school, for work, and even for attending events. You know, research shows that this rapid routine testing could drive down infection rates to close to zero, which is super important during this reopening of our islands. For Oceanit, their method is geared toward creating a safer environment so that in the big picture, we can reopen our economy.
How do we safely reopen the economy with COVID-19? How do we safely go back to work, school, travel, or attend events? We need to know who is infectious when they are infectious so that they can isolate from other people who may be particularly susceptible to infection. Assure19 is a simple saliva test for regular use that gives results in under 15 minutes, like an over-the-counter pregnancy test. With the current testing standard, people tend to experience symptoms 5 days after being infected. If they are tested around days 6 to 8 and get their results back a few days later, this means as many as 10 to 12 days may have passed since the initial infection. Unfortunately, peak infectiousness occurs around days 4 to 7, so they were probably spreading the virus before symptoms appeared and well before receiving a positive test result. Some carriers never experience symptoms and so never get tested, going about their days while at peak levels of infectiousness. Current PCR tests are great for diagnosis, but are not effective as public screening tools for two reasons: lag time, leading to detection after infectiousness has ended, and oversensitivity, leading to unnecessary quarantining. PCR tests are also costly and in precious limited supply. To stop viral spread, we need to quickly and affordably know who is infectious. Assure-19 tests are sensitive enough to catch infectious COVID-19 levels, while being affordable enough to use daily and simple enough to use at home. These rapid point-of-need tests do not require instruments or machinery, labs and technicians, nor mailing of samples and long lag times. Once approved by the FDA, Assure-19 manufacturing would be scaled, bringing the cost to less than $5 per test. It would be available to all of those exposed or at high risk of exposure, including those who are currently pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic. Only by catching the virus as it reaches infectious levels can we isolate and help stop the spread of COVID-19.
Oceanit has the green light from the National Institutes of Health and received its next round of funding to help expedite moving Assure-19 to the market. The Trans-Pacific Pre-Testing Program starts October 15th, which requires all travelers to have a pre-test within 72 hours of arriving to Maui. And in addition, Mayor Victorino is requesting a voluntary test 72 hours after arriving in Maui. So we and tourists will be so much better off when that Assure-19 test comes to market. So thanks you guys at Oceanit. We are excited to get those in our hands. And let's not forget that Oceanit is helping our kids to become the future generation that can solve the world's problems with the kind of innovative thinking that they use for every project. And that's called design thinking. They've created a free resource that kids can use at home during this distance learning time. The Altino program helps children to learn design thinking through computer coding to manipulate this virtual car. It's super cool. And don't underestimate this just because it's a simple program that's disguised as fun. This leads children to adopt a certain kind of problem solving that literally can save the world, just as Oceanit is doing with the Assure-19 rapid COVID test. So check it out at altinocoding.com. All right, mamas, now to the important info on how the coronavirus is spread through the air. Now, the show is about helping you to navigate proactively. And because we know that corona will be reintroduced to our community, don't fear, instead, prepare. All right, let's get some perspective. Now, remember in the beginning, we were all freaked out, wiping down every single little thing and wearing gloves and even wiping down every package that came to our house. Well, as time passes, science is revealing more and more about how this virus spreads and how we pick it up. And so now we know that COVID-19 is mainly spread through the air from our breath in what's called aerosols. And we are fortunate to have a National Geographic science writer here who will explain it all to us. Let's welcome Maya into the Zoom room. Hi, Maya. Welcome to the CoronaMama Zoom room.
Thanks so much for having me.
So would you introduce yourself to us and tell us what you do?
My name is Maya Wei-Haas, and I am a science writer with National Geographic. And I write on a whole range of topics, from Earth science and space to the coronavirus.
I came across this article that just wowed me. It was about the airborne transmission basically in different places that we can get it and data about how much our risk is. And what happened for me was that really helped me to see myself in different scenarios and figure out how to navigate my life that's safest for me and my family. It was a relief. So that's why I wanted to have you here on the CoronaMama Zoom room, because I think so many parents, even though we've heard a lot of stuff, we think we kind of know, we've formulated our protocol. It's always really nice to get a confirmation and to really know, okay, I just heard from someone who has researched the research and has put it into an article of how to operate. So the thing is, we have heard about airborne, aerosols, all these different terms, and I want to know from you what that means. Break it down for us of what that is, and then we'll get into the risks and all that.
Sure. So this all kind of comes around this, like as you're talking or even as you're breathing, and particularly if you're singing or shouting or coughing, you have kind of spit and globs of things that come out of your mouth, and they happen in a whole range of sizes, from tiny little particulate that can float around the room to much larger kind of globules that will often fall closer to the ground. And if you're standing next to someone who particularly enunciates well, you might actually have felt this, the little spray. And within these droplets is what is where coronavirus can actually transmit, or how one way coronavirus can transmit from person to person. And so if you're standing next to someone who's sick, that's one way that you might be able to get this virus. And so the debate on aerosols, though, has to do with the smallest of those particulates. So you have kind of this whole gamut of sizes. And before, we were most really thinking about those largest ones. They're the droplets. You can think of them like raindrops. They sort of, you spit, you talk, they fall to the ground. And that's where a lot of these recommendations came from, of like that 6-foot rule that, you know, it's a little bit squishier than that really, but we kind of settled on the 6 feet, saying you stay away from 6 feet, because the idea was that it all fell to the ground and you wouldn't then have to worry about those droplets falling in your eyes or getting on your hands and then rubbing your eyes, that sort of thing. But it turns out there's a lot more complicated than that, like everything. And the things that we're most concerned about, or that there's a lot of concern right now that we hadn't been accounting for, are those tiny particulate, because those still come out and you're breathing or even talking on a low level. And those have the potential to float across a room or linger in the air for much longer. They don't just fall straight to the ground. And so there was concern that, or the concern is that you can then get the virus from these particles. And it's far from straightforward exactly how long and how much you need in order to get it, but that's sort of the basis of that debate. And those tiny particles are called, are referred to as aerosols, and that's this airborne debate. It surrounds those tiny particles.
Is there still debate about how long those particulate can stay in the air? And like, you know, a scenario would be somebody sneezes and then they're not even in that place where that happened, and then you walk by and through it. I mean, that's probably like the most nightmarish scenario, because if we think that, then we're like, it could be anywhere, you know, like that kind of
Terrifying. And you know, and that's the thing. So as far as we know, for coronavirus, people haven't gotten sick in that manner.
Okay.
Like someone was sick in a room and then left, and then hours later someone else came in a room and got it. There hasn't been an account of that. That's not to say it could never happen, but we haven't seen it so far, and we've documented a fair amount of cases. That actually was a concern with measles, which is a classically airborne disease. Measles can infect people for, I think, up to 2 hours after someone with the disease left the room. So they walk in the room, they sneeze, they leave. 2 hours later, you can still potentially get the disease. For coronavirus, it just doesn't transmit that way. And that's partly why there's some of this debate about, okay, is it airborne or not? Because it doesn't act like these, like what we think of as traditionally airborne or classically airborne diseases like measles or even chickenpox, which there are cases of one person transmitting it to another person all the way down a long hallway. Which again, we haven't seen with coronavirus. So when we're thinking about coronavirus, the question is more sort of room scale is how it's been described to me. And we don't have specific cutoffs, because right now the science is still evolving. We're still learning a lot of these things, but we're worried. The concern is more if you're standing across a room from someone else, and it's like the particulate has kind of time to build in a poorly ventilated environment. So one scientist, Angie Rasmussen, actually described this as adding food coloring to a tank versus an ocean. And this was actually a really good way for me to wrap my head around it. Think about a closed, poorly ventilated room as a fish tank, and the outdoors is your ocean. And so you're adding food coloring as if you're like sitting, breathing, talking in this room. And that would be your particulate. Adding food coloring. Initially, you add a couple drops, the water is not going to change color. But if you keep adding those drops to the fish tank, it'll eventually shift its color. You can add all you want. You can dump bottles in the ocean and it's going to be the ocean. So that's more the concern of that color change really inside a room. So if you're in there for a long period of time and there's a lot of people in there, your risk is much higher because those particles potentially have time to build up in the air. And that's really sort of the situation we're talking about. The virus itself, they think, can potentially live in particulate for as long as maybe 3 hours or more, but it's sort of a hard thing to determine for sure because this was done in experiments and not tested. It's not easy to show in the real world, and so they can sort of aerosolize the virus and test it in sort of this controlled environment. But the real world is much more different than that, and I think there are a lot more factors at play, and that's probably why we don't see infection happening a lot like that in the real world.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, I love the fish tank in the ocean theory, and that helps us to understand the small space versus the big space, and how much time we spend in there will like increase our viral load, which I've heard it called. So then we'll be able to like collect basically more and more virus, which will affect us more and make us sick.
Yeah.
And then there's airflow. I think that's and masks, which I think that's something that I read with the airflow and air conditioning and direction of flow or outdoor air. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So airflow is kind of all comes down to this, like that it's a continuum of different sizes, and it's hard to say if you have a particle that's this size, it's going to go exactly this far from you. Like it's really a tough thing to draw those sort of straight lines through. And so how far these particles travel it relies on a lot of different things, like even temperature and humidity change how far these particles and how long the virus lives, that sort of thing. And airflow can carry potentially your droplets that you're breathing or talking out much further than it would if you were sort of in a room where air is not moving around. And so there was this one case in a restaurant in China, which is generally the most common one that people talk about when we're talking in terms of airflow, in which there was a wall-mounted air conditioning unit that had a very directional flow that sent air from kind of one table of people to the next table to the next table. And they looked at these video documents and showed that the people really didn't interact, but yet there was one person that's sick that got people sick across, I believe it was 3 different tables. And so that tends to be where this concern comes from. And so the CDC, or apologies, actually, I don't think it was the CDC. There's some guidance from some of the ventilation organizations that kind of make recommendations about ventilation. And one of them mentioned, and actually, I think the CDC maybe have linked to some of this on their site, but they mentioned, like, if you put a fan in a room and you put it behind someone who's sick, like you don't want, because you're then like pushing all of their particulate much further out in the room than it would otherwise go. And so that's where airflow comes in on all of these things. I think when we're talking about like rooms that are relative risk of different rooms, Japan actually came up with kind of an easy way to think about this. They call it the 3 C's. So it's closed spaces, crowded places, and close contact settings. And those are the 3 things that you have to worry about most. So the close contact settings, if you're standing right in front of someone, that's going to be when you get the brunt of the spray. Both big droplets and also aerosols are quite abundant right there. They don't have time to disperse, so they're right in your face. And so that's the problem with close contact. Crowded spaces, if there's a lot of people in a room, that's going to be a problem. And then closed spaces, if it doesn't have ventilation, which is bringing air in from the outside. So the problem with that air conditioning situation that we were talking about, or even a fan, is that it's directing air within one room, but it's not mixing it with fresh air to sort of, move the air through. It's just taking the air and moving it from one place to the next. So you can actually shuttle the virus from one person to the next without with just kind of a unit that doesn't actually bring air in from the outside.
That reminds me of a situation early on in the pandemic where we weren't wearing masks or anything at the time. And I was in Target in the bathroom and someone flushed the toilet. And then at the same time, someone, they were drying their hands, oh, actually, no, somebody sneezed. Then they flushed the toilet. And then the air dryer went off. And I was like, this is a nightmare. I was just like, I am stuck in this enclosed room with no ventilation. And I don't think the science, or there weren't articles out yet, but just in my mind, I was like, there's virus that's coming out of somebody and just being spewed everywhere.
The science may have changed a little bit more recently, but when I last sort of looked into this a few weeks back, there has been ongoing science to try to figure out whether the coronavirus that was identified in the fecal matter, whether that could actually is live, whether it could transmit the virus. Because if it's just broken apart or digested, like, it doesn't necessarily, just identifying it there doesn't necessarily mean that it can get someone sick. So that science is still sort of out, and we're not entirely sure. The concern is that when you flush a toilet, if there isn't a lid, I guess a lot of public bathrooms don't have lids, it can create this kind of plume of aerosols that just poofs up. So the concern would be that it would put it in the air. The thing is that you're spending a short amount of time in there, hopefully, and that you do a good job not touching a lot of surfaces, or if you do, you wash your hands very well. And I think that would be sort of my biggest concern in restrooms, would be to make sure that you're spending sort of a short amount of time, and then, be careful about what you're touching, and do a good job washing your hands, and then get out of there if you have to use a public restroom. I think particularly in a pandemic, it's an environment that we would be worried about, because in normal circumstances, I'm already a little wary about how clean public restrooms are. It always feels like it could be a hotbed of, viruses, and my little
a little germophobic like that.
Like, oh my gosh, I don't want to touch anything. But I think that we haven't seen them as a major route or a major location. There was a case recently where they think that transmission may have happened from a restroom on an airplane, from they suggested maybe touching contaminated surfaces, I believe, on the airplane.
More so than the air. I mean,
more so than the air, but yeah, but I mean, I think this was their suggestion based off of, like, okay, she was in the restroom, but it's sort of, there haven't been a lot of cases of people getting it from restrooms, and so perhaps that might change. But I think that it's safe to say you need to be careful in them. But if you need to use a restroom, like, get in, get out, and do what you need to do.
And I'm thinking, keep your mask on.
Keep your mask on, for sure. And masks are a big part of this. And it's funny, I think people have really had a hard time adjusting to this changes in guidance. And I think we need to be flexible in, as the science evolves, to and as the situation evolves, as the availability of different types of masks evolve, we need to be flexible in the types of precautions we're taking. And masks are something that is really important. And we've been realizing it, and this whole airborne debate sort of emphasizes also how important masks are, because those cloth masks do a pretty good job at stopping, particularly the big stuff that you're sort of spitting out. And the other thing about masks is that they prevent, so when you talk, you have particulate come out, and some of that sort of shrinks and can turn into aerosols as it goes away from your body. So it's actually pretty effective in preventing some of those aerosols from forming in the first place. So, and if everyone wears them, it adds up. So if that person that sneezed that was in the bathroom with you wore their mask, it would reduce the amount of aerosol in the air if they were sick. If you're wearing a mask, it would then even cut however much you're going to breathe in. So having both people with masks on is the best kind of circumstance that you can be in.
Right, that makes sense. And now that we're talking about the spittle and everything lately, I am actually noticing people when they talk emphatically, you see these little, I mean, I can see the droplets, and it kind of freaks me out. I'm like, oh, when I say that means I'm too close.
Yeah.
So if you see somebody spittle, step back,
Yep.
not alarmed, but just,
Take a step.
in a very diplomatic way, just step back.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's hard because close contact is how we talk with people. It's how we interact, we want to sit down and have a conversation. It feels very weird to sit across a room. I have I was I've been trying to talk with my grandfather regularly on Zoom. We used to visit him. We live just like a 4 hour or so drive away. And so we used to go at least once a month to help him out whenever with shopping and things like that. And it's been hard not to see him. And it's so strange to try to talk with him on Zoom. And so we were just talking recently about kind of going out and maybe just like sitting out out in his lobby and just like hanging out there. But it just, I don't know, we decided in the end it would just feel more sad than anything to have to stay across the room from him.
Right.
It's hard, but the thing is, those close contacts though are where you're really exposed. That's like the highest risk situation you can put yourself in, is being in front of someone with neither person wearing a mask, because that's really where that cloud of spray is coming. And so that's also, again, why indoor situations, when we talk about going into restaurants and bars, you're often in these crowded spaces where you can't separate very much. I mean, it's hard to make those environments safe right now. And so outdoors is really like, if you can eat outdoors, if you can, visit with friends. I've had socially distant picnics several times. Outdoors, you have the wind moving. There are things that kind of dissipate the virus. And I've realized I'm actually so much more comfortable. Indoors, I these days, anytime I'm near anyone, I'm just like, okay, I need to move this way.
Right. I want to clarify that I was having a conversation with people without a mask on because when I surf, I usually park. And often, I don't know why, often the man next to me starts talking to me, like whomever. It's always a man for some reason. And
Yeah.
and he is taking his board out, and I'm taking my board out, and we start talking, maybe to just that I welcome conversation somehow. I have a friendly face or something. So that enables them to start like talking. And men, I'm seeing just personally, when my observation, that they speak more emphatically, and they have these big droplets that come out. So I'm now aware of that, and when I do talk to someone, I have my surfboard like angled so that we have to keep at a distance, because I don't really want to say, I mean, it's such hard with this corona etiquette, like how to manage that social situation, because you don't really want to say, I see your spittle and you need to step back, but you also, so you do it gracefully. But that's where I find the most interaction of conversation, when I'm not going to be wearing a mask because I'm going to go in the ocean, and so are they. But we're parked next to each other, and we're closer than 6 feet when we're.
Yeah. I mean, when you're parking, you don't really have a choice a lot of time. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, just wanted to clarify that. So I was thinking, what I found really interesting were the articles. That in the article there were some of the diagrams and data. I'm wondering if you might want to go over that.
Yeah. So, okay. So the article has a series of sort of models that you can change parameters in, and it will give you sort of an estimate of risk. And these are really to keep in mind when playing with these. These are rough estimates. You can they say, the researcher said, think about it in terms of order of magnitude. Like we know that if it says 10%, okay, well, it's likely not 90%, or if it's 0.1%, it's a rough estimate of risk. But you can play with different factors. So you can say, okay, how many people in the area where I live are sick? How effective is the mask that I'm wearing? How large is the room, or how much space does each person have within that room? And then, is how effective is the other people, are everyone else's masks in that room? And it spits out these numbers. And so one of the things that I found most interesting about this, and sort of this changed a little bit of how I was thinking about risk, was that it really emphasizes that the longer you're in one of these situations, the greater your risk is. And this was going back to what you mentioned earlier, kind of viral load. There's a, I don't actually know where it came from. There's a saying common in chemistry, the dose makes the poison. Everybody, it's just sort of something that a lot of people always say is the dose makes the poison. But it really, you can have small amounts of something that's toxic as long as it's below whatever that quantity is required, or the dose, to make someone ill. And so if you have a small exposure for a short period of, or a large exposure for a short period of time, your risk is going to be much lower than if you have, like some of these show, like a moderate exposure for a very long period of time. Your risk actually will increase over time. Or if you're in that situation multiple times because you have higher number of chances of coming into contact with someone that has the virus. So I think that for these, that was sort of one of my takeaways. And that was something one of the researchers said to me, because I was asking sort of how it's hard to incorporate this in your daily life, some of these plots and things like that. And so they were saying, you can think about it, always keep time in mind. If you go into a grocery store and it feels stuffy and there are tons of people and there's no way to separate, but you have to get, I don't know what, something, you have to get that ingredient, pasta for your dinner, and you're making meatballs, and so she said, okay, well, if you really need to be there, get in and out, don't linger, don't, go wandering the aisles, get your thing, get yourself out of there. And that's, you reduce your risk, as opposed to staying in there and, okay, well, I'm just going to get the rest of my shopping list because I'm already here. Maybe not that day because it's just too busy. And so it's those types of situations that this can hopefully help in, and sort of help navigate a little bit. I think the most important thing, though, to keep in mind with all of the plots that we presented in here, and it's emphasized somewhat in the article, is that these all are for aerosols. So this isn't talking about that situation where you're standing next to someone. If you go into a room when it's only one person and it's a giant room, even then, if you're standing next to them and you don't have a mask and they're sick, you're going to expose yourself to much higher risk. So this is only for those potentially aerosol kind of situations where you're across a room. And that's these calculations, and apologize, I should say these calculations were done by Jose Luis Jimenez, and I'm actually apologies if I'm mispronouncing his name, but he's at the University of Colorado Boulder. And so this is based on models that he and a slew of other scientists have kind of put input into, but he has led this project to put together these models for various situations. And it's in the main article, we link sort of his original work. So if you want to go into much finer detail, because we simplified this down, you can kind of go back to his work and play around with the parameters there. I believe he has it in an Excel spreadsheet.
I just want to get into the topic of school and classrooms, because I know that's on the top of parents' minds.
Yeah.
And, there's people who are just like, I'm just doing 100% distance learning because I don't want to take any chances. So if we could just kind of give an overview of how to navigate that, if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to preface this by saying I'm not a health expert, so this varies depending on where you are and your personal situation as well. Your living situation, if you have people in your house that have pre-existing conditions or who are older and you're more concerned about, this decision is something that everybody has to kind of figure out what's right for them. The other thing that I wanted to say before we started specifically talking about schools is risk for all of these situations it is not black and white. Everything is on a grayscale. So we're looking at relative risk. And so the school opening has really, this has been a huge debate. And partly one of the problems with this is that the way that it's often posed is open or closed. Like everyone says, okay, school's either open or all of the schools closed. Well, what about if we're talking about different grade levels? What about if we're talking about different schools with resources to do this, that, and the other? And even right now, different areas of transmission. Some areas have a lot of case counts where they probably shouldn't be in groups. Other areas are moving much lower, so perhaps there's a way to actually manage this. So I think that it really depends on all of these factors, whether or not it's a safe thing. It's hard, I think, as we watch these reports come out. I think I've mostly been looking at some of the college reports come out of the case counts and when they've had outbreaks or numbers of people. But we also have to take into consideration a lot of the places that are able to do this safely. So it's hard, but there are definitely a lot of places where if transmission is high, if there's a high level of people in your community that are still testing positive, that are still getting sick, it's a really hard thing to do classes indoors in person. And I think that that's sort of what we've been seeing. If transmission is low, there are things that some schools have been putting in place that seem to have been helpful. I mean, there's, the ability to separate desks, the ability to wear masks, the ability to set if the school is well ventilated, which unfortunately a lot of schools may not be. There's a lot of things to think about. And so it's really hard to give a yes/no answer to that question. And I think, and I empathize with parents. I know that my nieces are like, it's just so hard to be like, oh, I was talking with their grandmother recently, and I just like, it's so hard to understand what is safe and what is not. And they're doing distance learning right now. And it just, I know it's tough. It's hard for them to keep attention. It's hard for their parents because they have to work. So it's not, there are so many other factors that go into this, and you kind of have to do what is right for you and what is the level of risk that you're willing to accept. But I think that going into it, making an informed opinion is important. So talking to your school about what measures they're taking, trying to figure out if there are ways that for your particular child you could reduce that. I don't know if some classes have even tried to experiment doing some outdoor learning, which I know isn't possible in all environments, but that's a really good way to reduce risk entirely. But then again, for young kids, that's going to be something really hard, because you're not going to be able to put a bunch of little kids outside and say, okay, we're now going to learn. I know that's not a situation that they can really hold their attention on one thing very well. So it will really depend a lot on your individual circumstances.
Yeah, well,
and I know that's not really answering the question at all.
No, I understand. No, what's helpful is to see like all the variables and to put some of the items of those variables, of what's happening in Maui into, these parameters. Is that on this island, we have very few cases in Maui at this time. Oahu has more.
Mm-hmm.
Big Island has some, Kauai, it's very low. So, as parents, we can say, well, right now, while they're holding off tourism at this moment.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Right. At this moment, it's coming. But at this moment, we have less likelihood of infection because there's less likelihood of it being in our community. And then if we add each risk factor to it to assess each risk factor and say, well, the school that my kids go to, it's a private school. So fortunately, they actually have outdoor spaces with tables and chairs, and there's some enclosed for the small early childhood, so they can be outdoors.
Oh,
and
good. Yeah.
They opened up walls to have a larger classroom. So 2 classrooms are now 1 classroom.
Mm-hmm.
They have big windows. Every room has lots of multiple huge windows. It already was that way, so we're very lucky. So they can do a lot of outdoor time, and then if they're inside, then they have the windows open, and they monitor how much time they spend in, and they are separated, and they're wearing masks. So it's like each thing is that measured risk of how close are we? How much time are we spending in there? Are they wearing masks? How much time do they spend outside? Are they touching surfaces that their cohorts don't touch? Actually, in this school, they only have them going 2 days a week for middle school and 3 days for the young, so they can switch off, and no class touches the surface of another class before it's cleaned. They don't even cross paths. So if the school has the space and they're able to work that out, or if you're doing a homeschool situation, which is a cohort situation, you can work that out and kind of take these risk factors and say, which of these can we make a little bit better in
Yeah.
this scenario? So just knowing that these parameters really does help. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that the cohort situation actually is an important one to sort of, I had heard it in terms of your bubble, creating your bubble, and kind of having an agreement with other families, that, you are going to limit risk in all other environments, but then, you can actually gather, your kids can play, that sort of thing. But you kind of have an understanding that, okay, we're the only other family you're going to do this with, or, two family, however many people you decide, but like bring in a small, make your bubble just a little bit more wider than it is. And it kind of helps reduce it. And that's a really good point, with a cohort learning too.
I think that's so helpful because right now we're looking at physical threat, but there's such a setup for this emotional threat where if we don't have socialization in the long term, that is so unhealthy for a child's well-being. And I've seen groups that I know that are friends that come together and they've agreed with their protocol on how they
Hmm.
behave in
Yeah.
the world so
Yeah.
everyone can be in agreement and feel safe and say, okay, we're all doing this. And it's a communication thing. It's just being
Yeah.
able to communicate and
It
say,
is.
okay, we're agreeing to do this. We're setting up these
Mhm.
rules and we'll be able to hang and feel good and feel safe if we can all agree. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
that's how
It
some are
brings a
doing it.
little bit more normalcy back to life. I think everything feels so strange and so off, and I can't imagine how hard it is for kids right now to not be able to see friends, to not be able to do the things that you do as a kid. Like, so yeah, it definitely, it helps a little, and I think it's just, it's really all about understanding what those individual risk factors are, and figuring out which ones are okay, because it adds up. But any one individual thing is not necessarily the thing that's going to make or break you. It's kind of risk you kind of have to think of as a whole. And so yeah, it's again, it goes back to like what we're even talking about with time, like in a place, there are so many different things that affect risk, so you really kind of have to keep that in mind, and think of it on that sliding scale. The situation is rapidly evolving, and we're all doing what we can to kind of keep up with it. And I think that we need to sort of make sure that we're all doing our part in this. And I think that's sort of the way I've been thinking about masks, is that it's not just protection for me, it's protection for everybody else, because you can transmit this without even knowing you have it. And so I think it's just, we all need to kind of do as much as we can, do our own part to try to keep up with this. But I think that exactly what you were mentioning before, though, that we need to be a little bit kind to everyone right now, kinder to everyone right now. Everyone's having a hard time. No one's having a good year. And it's just, I think with the social media culture and everything, people tend to like to pile on. And so, yeah, it's definitely a rough situation, but I hope that, through research and laying things out, that we can bring a little bit more sense to what situations might be okay and not okay, for each individual.
Yeah, thank you. So where are you going to be zooming off to now? Is it midday for you or later in the day for you?
It's almost the end of the day, actually. I'm going to take my own advice and spend some time outdoors this weekend. My husband, and my little pup and I are all going on a socially distanced camping trip, with some of my
Nice.
friends. So I have to go get packing and put food together and everything for the weekend. So I'm excited to get out into the woods.
Oh, that sounds really fun. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
thank
It'll
you
be
so much. It's so
great.
nice
Thank
to
you.
meet you. I love your work, and I'll be following you on National Geographic and seeing what else you put out there.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for having me. It was really great to chat with you about this.
Now we know how we can minimize our risks, and we actually will get back to some sense of normalcy once we get those Assure test kits into our hands. Can't wait for those, guys. Thank you so much, guys at Oceanit, for working so hard to help us to get those ASAP. Okay, mamas, if you're struggling with anxiety, I have something for you. I've got a 20% discount link for onlinetherapy.com. Okay, it's not just a chat with a therapist, it's actually a complete toolbox, which includes a personal therapist for sure, activity plan, worksheets, journal, live chat, yoga, and more. So just click on the link on the Maui Mama Magazine Facebook page show notes to get that 20% off. Okay, mamas, if you haven't joined the Halloween fun already, here is a fun Halloween DIY project for you and your pet. This haunted cat mansion contest by the Maui Humane Society is challenging you to make your own homemade cat mansion. Post your comments on their Facebook page. Enter now through October 17th for a chance to win a special prize. Okay. Now, let's get into why smiling is good for us, even if we're wearing masks. Well, research shows that social contact improves physical and mental health, increases immunity, and reduces stress. So before we wore masks in public, we got a dose of wellness, every positive interaction that we have, because it supports our sense of well-being. And in the primitive sense, a smile signals to each other that we're safe with each other. And now another thing researchers have found is that it's not so much about the mouth smiling, but humans are really good at reading eyes. So then with smiling, the longer a person gazes into another person's eyes, we actually get a bit of oxytocin. That love hormone is released, and that boosts our immune system. So let your eyes smile, or as Tyra Banks calls it, smizing. Eyes smiling, I think that means, right? So now I want to leave you with the song Let Your Eyes Smile by Tori Knight. For now, mamas, take care, stay safe, and be well. Aloha.
Times are rough, the times are different, but here we are, we're trying to make it work, and make a difference, 6 feet apart, even though the virus is here, we can't live our life in fear, so let your eyes smile, you gotta do it every day, let your eyes smile, 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 and let it all go away. Black or white or whatever, then we're all in this together. Gotta smile. I know it's hard without a restriction. It can give you the blues. So just go outside and be some life in. Turn on the news. Even though you should be wearing a mask, this too will come to pass. So let your eyes smile. You gotta do it every day. Let your eyes smile, smile, smile. Aloha, go away. When the world starts spinning again, you and I should still be friends. We gotta smile. To the first responders, the nurses and docs, who never seem to ever get off the clock. The essential workers doing their thing. Thank you for the normal see you bring. We want to say mahalo for all you do.